Take out a piece of paper. At the top, label it bell work. In the upper right-hand corner, put your name and today's date. Today is Thursday, October 29th. Pause the video to complete your bell work. When you're ready to go over your bell work, hit play. Number 1. At a bake sale, plates of cookies, C, are sold for $4 each. The amount of money from the sale of cookies is expressed as dollars D, which equation represents the earnings of the bake sale. So right now they want to know which of my equations gives me my earnings. So I want to figure out how do I get my earnings. Now they gave me the variable D. So how would I get 4, 8, and 12? What do I do with my cookies, which is variable C, in order to get my earnings? So remember, each plate of cookie is $4. So I'm multiplying by 4. So I would do C times 4 to get my earnings. If I'm looking at A, they were showing me how I get my cookies. However, we did not need the cookies, the plates of cookies. We were looking for the earnings. On B, they were adding their plates of cookies to 4, which is not what we needed. If I look at C, we know that a number beside a variable represents multiplication, so C would be correct. And looking at D, we know that a fraction bar represents division. To get my earnings, we were not taking our plates of cookies and dividing them by 4, or we were not taking 4 and dividing it by our plates of cookies. So my only answer would be C. Number 2, who walks at a faster rate? Someone who walks 60 feet in 20 seconds, or someone who takes 5 seconds to walk 25 feet. So we have person number 1. They are walking 60 feet in 20 seconds. Remember, if I'm finding their rate, the formula is rate equals distance divided by time. So I'm dividing to figure out how long it takes them to walk, how far do they go in 1 second. So mental math, 60 divided by 20, they end with zeros, so take off my zeros. 6 divided by 2 would make 3. So we know that person number 1 walks 3 feet in 1 second. Person number 2 was 25 feet in 5 seconds. All right, so again, you're trying to see how far can you go in 1 second. So you're doing division. You're finding the rate, distance divided by time. So mental math, 25 divided by 5 gives us 5. So right now, we know that this is 5 feet in 1 second. So who is walking at a faster rate? We would say person number 2. Number 3, for every pint of red paint, R, there is 3 pints of yellow paint, Y. Write an equation to represent how to find the yellow paint variable Y, okay? So again, you can think about this as a table if you want to. Every time you have red paint, you also have yellow paint. And it says for every pint of red paint, R, there's 3 pints of yellow. So for every 1 pint of red, there's 3 pints of yellow. If I had 2 pints of red, I would have 6 of yellow. 3 pints of red would give me 9. So remember, R is red, Y is yellow. What is my relationship? How would I write an equation? Remember, equations have equal signs. To help me find the yellow paint. So to get my yellow paint, to get 369, what do I do with the red? I would multiply red times 3. Remember, you can also do a number stuck beside a variable. You could also do your times sign. Any of those would work. So as long as I'm taking my red pints and multiplying them by 3, I will get my yellow paint. When you're done with your bell work, go ahead and put it in your binder, in your workbook. Turn to Lesson 24 on page 103. Today, we are moving into percents. So what we're going to do today is we're going to model percents and write a percent as a fraction over 100 or a decimal to the hundredths place. So percents is always out of 100. So if you ever go shopping, you might see that there's something that's 20% off, okay? So that 20% means every $100 I'm spending, I can get $20 off, okay? That is my 20%. So percentage is always out of 100, okay? So let's look at exercise 1. Exercise 1 on page 103. It says Rob's fruit farm consists of 100 acres on which 3 different types of apples grow. On 25 acres, the farm grows Empire apples. Macintosh apples grow on 30% of the farm, and the remainder of the farm grows Fuji apples. Shade in the grid below to represent the portion of the farm each type of apple occupies. Use a different color for each type of apple, and it says create a key to identify which color represents each type of apple. Okay, so there's kind of a lot going on in this problem. Starting off, it said that we have the Rob's Fruit Farm has a 100-acre farm. So right now, if I'm looking at this grid, what does this grid measure by? So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this is a 10 by 10 grid, which gives me 100 squares, 100 units. All right, so right now, we know that on this farm, there's 3 different types of apples that they grow. So they want me to give a color, a different color to each type of apple. So what I'm going to do is, if you have color pencils or a marker, I'd prefer a color pencil, pause the video and go grab 3 different colors and then come right back and hit play. Okay, so right now we have Empire, and I'm going to say that my Empire, it is red. I'm going to make those red. Well, if I can get it, I will make it red. There we go. Okay, all of my Macintosh, I'm going to make green. And my Fuji apples, I will make blue. So there's my key, okay? And so right now, they want me to figure out what is my part to whole ratio for Empire. So looking at Empire apples, they said that on my 100-acre farm, 25 of those acres are Empire. So my whole farm, my whole would be 100. Part of that is my Empire, which was 25. So that ratio is 25 to 100. All right, for my Macintosh, let me change my color again. Give me just a second. There we go. All right, so for Macintosh, we know Macintosh had 30% of the farm. Remember, percentage is always out of 100. So that means 30 out of the 100 acres is Macintosh apples. So that is 30 out of 100. Okay, and then the last set of apples that they have was the Fuji. It said the remainder was Fuji apples. Now, they did not give us a number for Fuji, so we are going to have to figure that out, okay? And so what I want to do right now on this grid is I want to start with my Empire apples, and I want to shade in 25 units or 25 blocks of my 100 grid. Now, we know that each column has 10. So if I shade in, if I'm making 25, I would shade in 2 full columns and how much of another column? And half of another column. Now, if you notice, I am not getting fancy with this. Okay, so there's my 100-acre farm. What I'm shading in right now represents my Empire apples. All right, now I want to try my Macintosh. I knew that 30 out of the 100 were Macintosh apples. So I'm going to pick up my 5 here. I can pick up another 10, so that makes 15. Another 10 would make 25. And I'm needing 30. So I'm going to go one more half of another column. There's Macintosh. Okay, so then it said everything else, the remainder of the farm, was the Fuji. So I need to figure out what percentage represents the Fuji. So right now I have 1 full column, so that's 10. Another full column, which would make 20. A third, so that would be 30. A fourth, that would make 40. And then you had 5 left over. So if I had 4 full columns, that's 40, plus 5 left over, that would be 45 to 100. Again, percentage is always out of 100. All right, go ahead and put up or put aside your colored pencils, and let's move into exercise 2. Exercise 2 says the shaded portion of the grid below represents the portion of a granola bar remaining. They want to know what percent does each block of granola bar represent, what percent of the granola bar remains, and what other ways can we represent this percent. So right now, again, I want to look at my grid and make sure we have a 100 grid. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this is a 10 by 10 again, which gives me 100 units. Remember, percent is always out of 100. So the first question says, what percent does each block of the granola bar represent? Now the thing is, it's out of 100. They gave me to it as 100th. And so if I do 100th times 100, that actually gives me a whole number of 1. So each little block of granola represents 1%. That represents 1%. Okay, so what percent of the granola bar remains? Now they said the shaded portion of the grid below represents the portion of the granola bar that was remaining. So if I want to figure out what percentage of my granola bar remains, I want to figure out how many are shaded, because that's what's remaining. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 columns fully shaded. And we know that in each column, there are 10 blocks. So 8 times 10 would be 80 out of my 100. And since it's a percent, it would be 80%. Okay, it says, what other ways can we represent this percent? Well, we can write it like a fraction. We could say that was 80 shaded out of how many? 100. You could also simplify it. What could I take from 80 that I could take from 100? I could take 10. So side note, if they are ending with a 0, take off your 0 and you get 8 over 10. So 80 over 100, 80 hundredths, is equivalent to 8 tenths. Okay, I can simplify 8 tenths. What could I take from 8 that I could take from 10? We could take 2. So 8 divided by 2 would be 4. 10 divided by 2 would be 5. Okay, if I didn't want to scale down and simplify, we could scale up. So I could also do multiply by 2. So 8 times 2 gives me 16. 10 times 2 gives me 20. So if you notice, all I've done is create equivalent fractions. I started off with my percentage of 80 over 100, and then I just started making equivalent fractions. Page 104. So right now it says, for each figure shown, represent the gray shaded region as a percent of the whole figure. Write your answer as a decimal, a fraction, and a percent. So right now, looking at picture A, can you tell me what percent represents the shaded region? If you notice, all of my grids are 10 by 10s. So they're all out of 100, which is my percent. So my shaded region on A, we have 2 full columns, so that would be 20%. So the thing is, we have to write it in 3 different ways. So I want to start with the easiest. Right now, we would write 20%. There's the percent. All right, to make it into a fraction, Ms. Holmes keeps saying, percentage is always out of 100. So I'm going to write 20 over 100. Percentage is always out of 100. Okay? And then I need to write it as a decimal. Well, to change a percent to a decimal, I will put a decimal at the end of my percentage, which was 20%, and I'll move it 2 places to the left. So this is technically 0.2, or you could put 0.20. Okay? If you didn't want to move your decimal, you write it as a decimal like how you would read it as a fraction. Well, this is 20 hundredths. So I would write it as a decimal like how I read it. It was 20 hundredths. Pause the video to complete parts B and C. When you're ready to go over them, hit play. Look at figure B. Now, if you notice on B, they have 2 parts that are shaded. One part is shaded darker than the other, but I'm going to go ahead and combine both of them. So right now, let's figure out our percentage. We know it's out of 100, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 full columns, and all of my columns are worth 10. So 10 times 5 would be 50. So that's half of my graph that's shaded. That's 50%. 50 out of 100. All right, fraction. Again, percent is out of 100. So this is literally 50 out of 100. Well, how do I read this? This is 50 hundredths. So here's my decimal. I'm going to the hundredths place, and I'm putting in 50. So my decimal is 0.50, 50 hundredths. On C, counting your shaded parts, you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 2 full columns. There's a column, so that's 20. And we got 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, I believe. Yes, so right now we have 48 out of 100, which would be 48%. Fraction would be 48 over 100. And as a decimal, I'm going to the hundredths place, tenths, hundredths. We had 48 hundredths. So there it is as a percent, a fraction, and a decimal. All right, next part, B. What ratio is being modeled in each picture? So remember, ratio. What's my part to whole? So looking at A, we had 20 out of 100. So that would be 20 to 100. That was A. Figure B. B was 50 out of 100, so that's 50 to 100. And on C, we had 48 out of the 100, so that's 48 to 100 that are shaded. On C, how are the ratios and percentages related? Well, what do you notice about your ratios and your percentages? Both are scaled out of 100. Out of a full 100. Exercise 4, page 105. Each relationship below compares the shaded portion, the part, and the entire figure, which is the whole. It says complete the table. So right now, they gave me 6%. They want me to write it as a decimal and as a fraction. So right now, let's pick up with what we know as a fraction. All percentages are out of 100. So this fraction would be 6 out of 100. And my decimal, I read this as 6 hundredths. So here's my decimal. I have tenths, hundredths. Now if I say 6 hundredths, 6 would go in the hundredths, and then I would put a 0 in the tenths. They want me to model this. So real quick, we can model this. All right, so we have 10 columns. Okay, and we have 10 rows. All right, so there is my grid of 100. Now, side note, I will not make you do a 100 grid for every single one of these, but for this one, we have to. So all I need to do is just shade out 6 out of my 100. There's 6%. That's 6 out of 100. If you need more time, pause the video. If not, we will continue. All right, our next one, we have 60%. So let's jump to the fraction. That would be 60 out of 100. My decimal, that's 60 hundredths. So I have tenths, hundredths. I'm going to put in 60. All right, my ratio would be 60 to 100. Now, do you remember let me find it. In exercise 2, we had written a variety of equivalent fractions that still represented my percentage. So what I can do on this one is, I don't have to draw the 100 grid because I know that 60 over 100 can be simplified. They both end with 0, so I can take 10 out of both. And that gives me 6 over 10. So I can technically draw a column or a row that's made up of 10. Okay, and I can shade in 6 of those. That would still be equivalent to 60 out of 100. That's still equivalent to 60 out of 100. All right, next one. We now have 600%. Now remember, we can only go out of 100%. So right now, I'm going to go ahead and write 600 over 100 because that's my fraction. But if you notice, that's improper. So what do we do with improper fractions? We do long division. Now, since they want me to keep it as a fraction, I can just simplify on this one. And what can you take from 600 that you could also take from 100? Well, they end in double zeros, so I can take 100 from both. And that makes 6 out of 1. And anything over 1 is that numerator. So this is technically 6 wholes, okay? So right now, my decimal would just be 6 or 6.0 if you wanted it. And my ratio would be 6 to 1. My ratio comes from my fraction. Now on this one, we just said it's 6 wholes. That's what it represents because we cannot go over 100%. If we go over 100%, you've hit a whole number. And we have 6 of them, so we have 6 wholes. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to draw what would basically be 6 100 grids. And I'm just going to fill them in entirely. So if these were all 100 grids, and I had 6 of them, that represents 6 wholes. All right, let's keep going. So right now, we have 32%. What is that as a fraction? 32 out of 100. Remember, percent is always out of 100. How would I write it as a decimal? I would have a point, going to the hundreds, tenths, hundredths, and we have 32. So it's 0.32. My ratio is 32 to 100. For right now, I will let you skip the model for your 32%. Moving on, we now have 55 hundredths. Now, all they gave us was the decimal, but we know it as a fraction. We write it like how we read it. It's 55 tenths hundredths. Okay, my percentage is always out of 100. So this is 55%, and my ratio would be 55 to 100. Again, we can simplify 55 over 100. So if you can write over here, we got 55 over 100. Do you know what you could take from 55 that you could also take from 100? You could take 5 from both. And that gives me 11 out of 20. So on this model, I could draw 2 columns or 2 rows, and they all contain 10 units or 10 blocks. Okay? And I would shade in, out of that, that's 20. Out of it, we would shade in how many? 11. Okay? I made that a little complicated. I could have also shaded in all of the first row and then one of the second row, or all of the second row and one of the first row. I was just shading in 11 out of 20. Now, if you noticed, how do I know when I don't have to do the full 100 grid? So, for example, on the first one, we did the full 100 grid. The second one, what did we do? So, if I know that I can take my fraction and simplify it, then that's another way that I can show my model. So, if it's a whole, or if it's any multiple of 10, like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, that's when you can model it that way. Is when you simplify it and it ends up being a multiple of 10. So right now, can you pause the video and complete the next two problems? You have 9/10, and then they gave you the last problem, which is a model. So pause the video to see if you can complete the last two. When you're ready to go over it, hit play. All right, so here we go. We have 9/10. Let's start with our decimal. Okay, so I'm only going to the tenths place. If I had 9/10, I only need one line. There's 9/10. All right, for my percentage. Now here's the thing. Percentage has to be out of 100. Our fraction was out of 10. So I need to make it so it's out of 100. Now what times 10 makes 100? 10. So 9 times 10 would make 90. So this is technically 90%, not 9%. And if you're asking why it's not 9%, the fraction would have originally been 9 out of 100. But look at what they gave us. They gave us 9 out of 10, 9/10. So we had to convert it to a 100. Okay, my ratio is 9 to 10. If you wanted to say 90 to 100, that would be fine too. And so right now, I don't have to draw a 100 grid. I can just draw 10 units and shade in 9 of them. Add more and more. And then just shade in 9 of them. And the last set of our models. You had to look at the model to figure out my fraction. So right now, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that's 7 out of 10. So my fraction is similar to what we just had. I have 7 out of 10. My ratio would be 7 to 10. Okay, my decimal, I read it as 7/10. So that's 7 in the tenths place. And then my percentage is always out of 100. So if my fraction is not out of 100, I need to change it and convert it where it's equivalent to 100. So 10 times 10 was 100. 7 times 10 is 70. So that is 70%. Percentage is always out of 100. Exercise 5, page 106. Mr. Brown shares with the class that 70% of the students got an A on the English vocabulary quiz. If Mr. Brown has 100 students, create a model to show how many of the students received an A. Okay, so right now we're creating a model on the first one, and then we'll look at our other three questions. So we know we had 70% of the class. He has a total of 100 students. So what is that as a fraction? That's 70 students out of his 100 that made an A. Now, if I'm modeling that, we could draw a 100 grid and shade in 70, but what else do we know that we can do? We can simplify. If I take 10 from both, I get 7 tenths, which is 7 out of 10. And that's equivalent to 70 out of 100. So again, I can draw 10 units and shade in 7 of them. There's 7 tenths. Pause the video to see if you can answer the final 3 questions of exercise 5. When you're ready to go over them, hit play. What fraction of the students received an A? So my fraction we said was 70 over 100, or we could simplify it and say 7 tenths. How could we represent this as a decimal? So we could say, remember 70 hundredths, write it like you read it, tenths hundredths, and I had 70 of them. Or you could say 7 tenths, which we know tenths is only 1 digit past the decimal, they're 7 tenths. How are the decimal, the fraction, and the percent all related? All of these were out of 100. So we could say the decimal, fraction, and percent all show 70 out of 100. Page 107, exercise 6. Marty owns a lawn mowing service. His company, which consists of 3 employees, has 100 lawns to mow this week. Use the 10 by 10 grid to model how the work could have been distributed between the 3 employees. So right now, we have 3 employees, and they have 100 lawns to mow. We need to figure out if we were to distribute the 100 lawns, what percentage of the lawn or the lawns would they need to mow? So for example, let's say that employee number 1 needed to mow 30% of the 100 lawns. Okay? So employee number 1 would be 30%. All right, what else could we do? So real quick, let's write our fraction. We would have 30 out of 100. As a decimal, that's 30 hundredths. Tenths hundredths, there's my 30 hundredths. All right, could you pause the video to finish employee 2 and 3's part of the table? Remember, in total, they should reach 100% of the grid. So if you want to go over it, hit play. It also says color over the name with the same color that you used in the diagram. So again, on this one, you are using colored pencils. I apologize. Go grab 3 colored pencils. And this would be my red employees. Using red employee number 1. And then pause the video to see if you can come up with 2 other percentages that employee 2 and 3 could have. When you're ready to go over it, hit play. Okay, so if I was trying to be somewhat fair amongst all this, I could say, hey, employee number 2, I'm going to give you 1, 2, 3, that's 30%. Let's give you 40%. Okay, so employee 2, I'm going to give you 40% out of the 100. Tenths, hundredths, there's my 40%. And you were pink. And then employee 3, you're going to be blue. And I'm going to give you the last 30% of my grid. So for the most part, they got a pretty fair, even amount of what they have to mow for the lawns. Tenths, hundredths, that's 30 hundredths. So you may not have done the same percentages that I do, but you need to make sure that all of your percentages would add up to the 100%. That is the end of lesson 24. When you are done with our lesson, you have 2 problems that you will be completing on your problem set. That is found on page 108. And you also have your exit ticket. As always, please complete your problem set in your workbook and then submit it online. You also have the exit ticket that you need to complete. If Ms. Holmes has instructed you to take a picture of your problem set and email it to her, then that is the route that you need to do for your problem set. The other friends, you will submit it online.